At least 21 states in Nigeria depend on allocations from the Federation Account Allocation Committee for more than 70% of their total revenue, and that's according to a new report by Budget Foundation. The report also disclosed that 29 states rely on FARC for at least 50% of their total revenue. Titled A Decade of Subnational Fiscal Analysis, Growth, Decline and Middling Performance, the State of States 2024 report was presented on Tuesday in Abuja by Budget's Group Head of Research and Policy Advisory, Vayala Kwaga. Now being joined by financial analyst and managing director, Cowry Asset Management Limited, Johnson Chukwu, to discuss this report by Budget and how these states can be made more viable. Good afternoon, Mr. Chukwu. Many thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon, Cynthia. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's just start with the basics. What do you make of this report?
Well, Cynthia, I don't think it's quite strange to us. I mean, we all know that several states, prior to the advent of this government, if you cast your mind back to when immediate past president, late Muhammadu Buhari became president, several states could not pay salaries. Several states could not function. The government had to give them lifeline. But now, under the current government, we've seen an adjustment in the exchange rate. We've seen an increase in allocation. So you see some of them look buoyant. But the reality is that the structure of the subnationals are still largely the same. Only very few states are in position to fund their operation without FARC allocation. And that's, I think somebody has used the word filibottle or a cap-in-hand system of governance in the country, a political structure where several states rely absolutely on the federation account to survive. And principally because we've not seen a situation where the governors focus on creating economic activities, turning their state into productive centers so that they can generate generating revenue and be able to sustain themselves. And in a lot of instances, many of them are not even able to even extract value from the economic activities in their state.
All right, Mr. Chukwu. Now, each state ordinarily should have a comparative advantage over others in terms of natural resources here. Any thoughts on why they haven't been fully explored, and this heavy reliance on the center, the FAAC as well?
Wendy, I think one factor is common among those states that are highly reliant on Federation Account Allocation Committee disbursements. One is that they've had consistently, over a period of time, governors or leaders who never really looked at how to generate revenues. I mean, we have live examples of states that turned around from being 100% dependent on FARC allocation to become almost financially autonomous. Lagos State had a challenge at some point until their local government allocation was seized, and then Lagos has transformed into a multi-trillion naira IGR generating state. We know of Edo State under the immediate past governor, Godwin Obaseki. They turned around their revenue generation. In fact, between Adams Oshiomhole as governor and Godwin Obaseki, they turned around the fortunes of Edo State that ordinarily did not look like an economic center to become almost self-sufficient in IGR. We've seen a lot of improvement in Edo State, in Enugu State going on now. We saw that in Kaduna State under immediate past governor El-Rufai. It depends on the quality of leadership. If you have a visionary leader, they will focus on creating economic centers within their state and stimulating or encouraging private sector investment or productive activity so that they will generate the economic activity on which they will tax. And again, you also have a situation where some state governments are relying on tax enforcement that are basically manual. You send people to go and stand on the road and waylay people on the road and ask them for their tax clearance certificates. Well, as today, you can use technology to track and trap individual revenues or income and tax them appropriately. But the most important thing is to focus on growing the level of economic activity in your state, attracting private sector investors so that there will be so many people employed and on which you can impose personal income tax on, or you can extract personal income tax on. So it's been driven by the quality of leadership. Visionary leaders know how to extract value from their economic activities within their states.
Absolutely. Now, you touched on tax reforms for a moment, but how the tax reform bills propose new revenue formulas. Now, how will these reforms affect states currently dependent on FAC from your assessment or perspective?
I think if you look at the Tax Reform Act, a lot of them, the redistribution of taxes are actually in favor of states and local governments. So even states that are not doing much may see their revenues increase. Of course, in terms of value-added tax, you may see states that have low consumption capacity, they have low economic activities, their income may decline. But ultimately, if you look at even what has happened in FAC allocation, as at the end of August this year, FAC allocation to the three tiers of government was over 14 trillion naira. So they are enjoying the tailwind effect of the reforms of the current government. But be that as it may, you still have those who are not able to survive without FAC allocation. And that will largely constrain economic activities. So for such states, we are seeing minimal economic activities in their states. Elsewhere in the world, where you have a federal structure, so the subnationals focus on attracting private sector investors into the economies. Because when they know when those private sector investors come in, they will employ their citizens, reduce the level of unemployment, but also add to the level of household income on which state governments impose taxes, because payee income tax or personal income tax is based on personal incomes of individuals, and that's the income that goes directly to the state governments. So hopefully these reforms will, I don't think the reforms alone that will drive that. It's going to be when we get to a point where the states begin to compete among themselves and say, look, I have this level of economic resources. I need to exploit it by creating some level of verification, some level of improvement in value addition, attracting investors to come and build on whatever I have as natural resources and create employment within my state boundaries.
Indeed, Mr. Chukwu. Now, it's a recurring issue. How do we relate the level of allocation to the issue of rising debt as well, especially domestic debt among the states?
Well, if you look at that, you realize, like I said, when you have leaders at some nationals, subnational levels that cannot think through or don't understand economic issues and are not able to submit to the advice of economic experts. So what they basically do is that they look at what is their revenue allocation coming from FAC. And on the basis of that, they borrow. They are not borrowing to create economic activity. They are borrowing for consumption purposes. And because they keep borrowing for consumption purposes, they need to pay back those debts from allocations, and that increases their debt burden. But if you have a visionary leader, even when they borrow for investment purposes. They borrow to invest in critical infrastructure that have the capacity to catalyze economic activities. So, and in that way, the debt burden won't be a problem. The increased level of economic activities will enable the state government to pay back those loans and actually have an expanded level of economic value. But unfortunately, some states are not in that situation. But the problem is not the debt. It's about what you do with the debt. And again, is that debt going to generate overall cash flow that will pay back itself and increase value for the state, for that state? That's where the challenge is. Because if you do not borrow and invest in critical infrastructure that have the capacity to catalyze economic growth, then you are going to burden your state and subsequent government with a debt profile that they're unable to service with increased revenue.
You mentioned that sometimes they borrow for consumption purposes. And another point that's also been raised is that governors collect FAC allocations monthly, but states remain underdeveloped. So where is this money actually going? Where does it go?
Well, Cynthia, between you and I, we all know that where a state is not properly governed, it creates room for leakages. Those leakages could come in form of not getting value for money, where contracts are given out and the contracts are inflated, or the contracts are not executed and therefore paid for, and therefore the state don't get money for get value for that money. You have instances where it's been largely alleged that some of the state governments convert part of the proceeds of allocation of FAC allocations into dollar, and whatever, who knows what they do with it. Some of the governors are focused primarily on re-election or political activities, and then you see allocation that come to them. Either they use it to settle political interest or to maintain the structure, as they call it, and then it doesn't go into public work. It doesn't go into the sectors, critical sectors of the economy, healthcare, education, infrastructure that are necessary. But what you see is that, like I said, the crux of the matter is the quality of leadership at the state government levels, not just at the state government, across the board. Because if you see a situation like that, you should actually have checks and balances with the Constitution and made provision for. The government is supposed to come to the State Assembly and say, look, this is our revenue and this is how we're going to appropriate it under the budgeting system. And then the oversight function of the State Assembly should have made them ask the governors, did you actually execute this project? Where is the value created from this project? But unfortunately, our political system has not matured to that extent where the governor, the chief executives at different levels of governance are held accountable by the legislature that are supposed to provide the oversight function.
You're right. Indeed, the quality of leadership matters here. Johnson Chukwu, Managing Director, Cowry Asset Management Limited, would like to thank you for your thoughts on that issue. It's good to have you with us.